The bullet that should have killed Logan Yates in the war took his heart instead. And when Margaret died giving birth to their stillborn son 3 years later in 1873, what remained of him turned to stone. Now, in the sweltering summer of 1878, he stood behind the bar of his saloon in Linden, Kansas, pouring whiskey for drifters and ranch hands while keeping his Winchester within arm's reach, and his emotions buried 6 feet deeper than his wife's grave. The last thing he expected on that scorching July afternoon was for a woman with eyes like storm clouds and determination etched into every line of her dust-covered face to push through the saloon doors carrying nothing but a carpetbag and a letter that would unravel everything he had carefully constructed to keep himself from feeling anything ever again. Logan barely glanced up when the doors swung open, continuing to wipe down the bar with methodical precision that had become as much a ritual as breathing. The afternoon heat made the air thick enough to chew, and most sensible folks were holed up somewhere cool, not walking into a saloon that smelled of tobacco, spilled beer, and broken dreams. But this woman walked in like she owned the place, her green traveling dress covered in trail dust, dark hair escaping from pins that had long since lost their battle against the Kansas wind. "I am looking for work," she announced, her voice carrying a hint of an accent he could not quite place, something Eastern maybe, refined but not prissy. "I can cook, clean, keep books, and I do not faint at the sight of blood or drunk men." Logan finally looked up, really looked at her, and felt something he had not felt in 5 years, an unwelcome flicker of curiosity. She was probably in her mid-20s, with a face that was more interesting than pretty, all sharp angles and determined chin. Her eyes met his without flinching, gray as a winter sky and just as unforgiving. "This is a saloon, lady, not a boarding house." His voice came out rougher than he intended, rusty from years of keeping conversations to the bare minimum. "I can see that." She set her carpetbag down with a decisive thump. "Which means you serve food, and judging by the smell coming from that kitchen, whoever is doing your cooking now should be arrested for attempted murder. You keep books because even a saloon has to track its whiskey and beer. And I would wager you could use someone who can patch up the occasional knife wound without running to fetch the doctor for every little scrape." Despite himself, Logan felt the corner of his mouth twitch. The woman had nerve, he would give her that. "Name?" "Nora Gallagher. And you are?" "Logan Yates. I own this place." He leaned back against the shelf of bottles behind him, crossing his arms. "What brings you to Linden? This is not exactly a destination town." Something flickered across her face, quick as lightning, there and gone, pain maybe, or fear. "I needed a fresh start. My husband died 6 months ago, and his family made it clear I was not welcome to stay in Philadelphia. I have no children, no ties, and I saw an advertisement that Kansas was looking for industrious people willing to work hard. So here I am." The mention of a dead husband should have made him more sympathetic. Instead, it made him want to send her away even faster. He did not need reminders of loss walking through his saloon every day, stirring up feelings he had worked damn hard to bury. But before he could form the words to turn her down, his current cook, a grizzled old prospector named Pete who could barely boil water without burning it, chose that moment to emerge from the kitchen carrying a pot of something that looked like it had died twice. "Stew's ready, boss," Pete announced, setting the pot down with a clang that suggested even he did not have much faith in its contents. Nora walked over, peered into the pot, and wrinkled her nose. "That is not stew. That is a crime against food." She looked back at Logan. "Give me 2 hours and access to your kitchen. If you do not think what I make is better than that, I will walk out of here and you will never see me again." Pete bristled. "Now see here, Lady Pete," Logan interrupted, surprising himself. "Take the afternoon off. Go get yourself a drink at Murphy's." The old man's eyebrows shot up, but he was not fool enough to turn down an unexpected break. He shuffled out, muttering under his breath about uppity women. Logan pointed toward the kitchen. "You have got 2 hours. Impress me." Nora did not smile, just nodded once and headed for the kitchen, rolling up her sleeves as she went. Logan watched her disappear through the doorway and wondered what the hell he was doing. The last thing he needed was complications, and Nora Gallagher had complication written all over her. But business had been slow lately, and Pete's cooking was driving away more customers than the watered-down whiskey he had stopped serving 2 years ago, when he decided that if he was going to run a saloon, he might as well run an honest one. The afternoon crowd started trickling in around 4, ranch hands finishing their day's work and looking to wash the dust from their throats. Logan poured drinks and made change, his attention divided between his customers and the sounds coming from the kitchen. Actual good smells were drifting out now, replacing Pete's usual burnt offerings with something that made his stomach remember it had been years since he had eaten anything worth savoring. By the time the 2 hours were up, Logan had almost forgotten about his impromptu challenge. Then Nora emerged carrying a tray laden with bowls of stew that actually looked like food, accompanied by fresh biscuits that were golden brown and steaming. She set the tray on the bar. "Taste it," she said simply. Logan picked up a spoon, acutely aware that half the saloon had gone quiet, watching this strange woman who had blown in like a dust devil. He took a bite, and damn it all to hell, it was good. Really good. The beef was tender, the vegetables actually had flavor, and the broth was rich without being greasy. He ate 3 more spoonfuls before he realized what he was doing. "I will pay you 50 cents a day plus room and board," he heard himself say. "You cook 3 meals, keep the books, and help with the cleaning. Room is upstairs, second door on the left. It is not fancy, but it is clean." For the first time since she had walked through his doors, Nora smiled, and Logan felt that unwelcome flicker again, stronger this time. Her smile transformed her face, softening those sharp angles into something that caught in his chest like a burr. "I accept," she said, extending her hand. He shook it, her grip firm and warm, and tried to ignore the fact that it was the first time he had touched another person with anything resembling gentleness in longer than he could remember. "You start tomorrow morning. Breakfast is at 6. I will be ready." She picked up her carpetbag. "Thank you, Mr. Yates." "Logan," he corrected, then immediately regretted it. Keeping distance meant keeping formality. But it was too late, the word was already out there, and Nora nodded as if he had just given her something more valuable than a job. He showed her upstairs to the room that had been empty since his previous bartender had left to try his luck in the Colorado silver mines. It was small but serviceable, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out over Linden's Main Street. Nora set her bag down and ran her hand over the quilt on the bed, a gesture so gentle it made Logan's throat tighten. "This will do perfectly," she said. "I will see you in the morning." Logan left before he could do something stupid like ask her if she needed anything else, or worse, linger in the doorway making small talk. He had customers to tend to, a business to run, and no time for the strange restlessness that had taken up residence in his chest since Nora Gallagher had walked into his life. That night, lying in his own room down the hall, Logan stared at the ceiling and listened to the unfamiliar sounds of someone else moving around in his building. For 5 years, he had been alone here, and he had liked it that way. Alone meant safe. Alone meant no one could leave you or die on you, or rip your heart out and leave you bleeding in the dirt. But now there was someone in the room down the hall, someone who made good stew and had eyes like a gathering storm. And Logan had the uncomfortable feeling that he had just made the biggest mistake of his carefully controlled life. Morning came too early and too bright, sunlight streaming through his window with the kind of cheerful insistence that made him want to shoot something. Logan dragged himself out of bed, pulled on his clothes and headed downstairs, expecting to have to wake Nora and remind her that 6 o'clock meant 6 o'clock, not whenever she felt like rolling out of bed. Instead, he found her already in the kitchen, flour dusting her cheek and the smell of coffee filling the air like a benediction. She looked up when he entered, her hair pulled back in a practical bun, wearing a simple brown dress with an apron tied around her waist. "Good morning," she said. "Coffee is ready, and breakfast will be done in 10 minutes. I found eggs, bacon, and potatoes in your stores. I hope that is acceptable." Logan grunted something that might have been agreement and poured himself coffee, savoring the first bitter sip. It was strong and hot, exactly the way he liked it. Margaret had always made it too weak, trying to make their supplies stretch, but he had never had the heart to tell her. The memory stabbed through him unexpectedly, and he forced it down, drowning it in another swallow of coffee. "You are up early," he said, because the silence was starting to feel too heavy. "Old habits. My mother ran a boarding house back in Philadelphia. I have been getting up before dawn since I was 12. Nora flipped the bacon with practiced efficiency. "You have a good setup here. The stove works well, and your pantry is better stocked than I expected. I pay my bills on time and I do not cheat my suppliers. They appreciate that." Logan leaned against the doorframe, watching her work. There was something almost hypnotic about her movements, economical and sure, no wasted motion. "You said your husband died. What did he do?" He saw her shoulders tense just for a moment. "He was a clerk at a shipping company. There was an accident at the docks, cargo fell, he was in the wrong place." Her voice was flat, reciting facts without emotion. "It was quick. The doctor said he would not have suffered." Logan knew that particular lie. They had told him the same thing about Margaret, that she had not suffered, that the birth had simply been too much for her. But he had been there, had heard her screams, had watched the light fade from her eyes while he stood helpless and useless. Quick or slow, dead was still dead, and nothing anyone said could change that. "I am sorry," he said, and meant it. Nora nodded without turning around. "So am I." Then, as if physically shaking off the darkness, she straightened her shoulders and started plating the food. "But we are both still here, so we might as well eat. Breakfast is served, Mr. Yates." "Logan," he reminded her, taking the plate she offered. The bacon was perfectly crisp, the eggs done just right, and the potatoes were seasoned with something that made them actually taste good instead of just filling. "This is excellent. Thank you." She made her own plate and sat down across from him at the small kitchen table, a familiarity that should have bothered him but somehow did not. "Tell me about Lyndon. What should I know?" So Logan told her, between bites of the best breakfast he had eaten in years, about the town that had grown up around the railroad and the cattle drives, about the farmers trying to make a living from the stubborn Kansas soil, and the ranch hands who came in on Saturday nights looking to spend their pay on whiskey and cards. He told her about Sheriff Morrison, who was honest but getting old, and about the Callahan gang that had been causing trouble up north but had not made it this far south yet. He told her about the church ladies who thought his saloon was a den of sin but whose husbands were his best customers, and about Doc Hendricks who drank too much but could still set a bone better than anyone else in 3 counties. Nora listened, asking questions that showed she was actually paying attention, not just being polite. By the time they finished eating, Logan realized with a start that he had been talking for almost an hour, more words than he usually spoke in a week. It should have alarmed him, this easy flow of conversation, but instead it felt almost comfortable, like putting on a coat he had forgotten he owned. The days fell into a pattern after that. Nora cooked, cleaned, kept the books with a neat hand that made his previous scrawled ledgers look like chicken scratches, and generally made herself indispensable. The customers noticed, of course. How could they not? A woman working in a saloon was noteworthy enough, but a woman who could cook like Nora and had the spine to tell a drunk cowboy to sit down and shut up or take his business elsewhere, that was something special. Logan found himself watching her more than he should, noticing things he had no business noticing. The way she hummed while she worked, old songs he did not recognize, but that made the saloon feel less lonely. The way she laughed at Sam Peterson's terrible jokes, a real laugh that reached her eyes. The way she automatically poured his coffee exactly the way he liked it without having to ask. Small things, meaningless things, things that should not matter but somehow did. 2 weeks after Nora arrived, trouble walked through the door in the form of 3 men Logan did not recognize, though he recognized the type well enough. They had that look, hard-eyed and mean, the kind of men who took what they wanted and did not much care who got hurt in the process. Logan's hand moved automatically to the Winchester under the bar as they swaggered up and demanded whiskey. He poured, keeping his face neutral, watching them in the mirror behind the bar. They were looking around the saloon like they were cataloging everything of value. And when Nora emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray of food for another table, all 3 of them focused on her, with an intensity that made Logan's jaw clench. "Well now," the tallest one said, his voice carrying that false friendliness that preceded violence. "Looks like this place has got more to offer than just bad whiskey." Nora did not even glance their way, just delivered the food and headed back toward the kitchen. But the tall man moved, quick as a snake, blocking her path. "Hey now, darling, no need to be unfriendly. Why don't you come have a drink with us?" "No, thank you," Nora said, her voice polite but cold as January ice. "Please move." "I do not think you heard me right." I said he did not get to finish. Logan had the Winchester out and cocked before the man's hand could reach Nora's arm. The metallic sound cut through the saloon's ambient noise like a church bell. "The lady said no," Logan said quietly. "And in my establishment that means you move, you apologize, and then you drink your whiskey and leave. Or you can argue, and I can put a hole in you that will make breathing real difficult. Your choice." The silence that followed was thick enough to slice. The tall man's eyes flickered from Logan to the Winchester and back again, calculating odds. Whatever he saw in Logan's face must have convinced him because he stepped back, hands raised in mock surrender. "Easy now, friend. No harm meant, just being friendly. Be friendly somewhere else." Logan kept the rifle trained on them until they downed their drinks and left, their boots heavy on the wooden floor. Only when the doors swung shut behind them did he lower the Winchester, his heart pounding harder than he wanted to admit. Nora stood frozen where the man had blocked her, her face pale but composed. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You all right?" "Yes," she took a breath, visibly steadying herself. "Yes, I am fine. That is not the first time I have dealt with men like that." Something in the way she said it made Logan's blood run cold. "Your husband's family." She looked at him sharply, surprised. "How did you? You said they made it clear you were not welcome. Men do not usually bother making things clear to women unless they are trying to scare them into leaving." Logan set the Winchester back in its place, his hands not quite steady. "Did they hurt you?" "They tried." Nora's chin came up defiant. They said I was after his money, that a woman from the slums had no business marrying a respectable clerk. They tried to have the marriage annulled after he died, said I had tricked him. When that did not work, they made it clear I should leave Philadelphia before something unfortunate happened. So you came here. I came here. She met his eyes, and there was steel in that gray gaze. I am not running, Logan. I am choosing. There is a difference. He found himself nodding, understanding that distinction in his bones. If those men come back, I know. Stay behind the bar, let you handle it. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. You are very good with that rifle. Military training. Something like that. He did not elaborate, and Nora did not push, just nodded and went back to work as if nothing had happened. But Logan noticed that for the rest of the day, she stayed a little closer to the bar, and he caught himself checking the doors more often, waiting for trouble that did not come. That night, after the saloon closed and the last customer had stumbled home, Logan was checking the locks when he heard footsteps on the stairs. Nora came down wearing a faded blue wrapper over her nightgown, her hair loose around her shoulders in a dark cascade that made her look younger, more vulnerable. Could not sleep, Logan asked, trying not to stare. I keep thinking about those men. She wrapped her arms around herself. What if they come back? Then I will deal with them, same as today. Logan hesitated, then added, You are safe here, Nora, I promise you that. She looked at him for a long moment, and Logan had the uncomfortable feeling she was seeing more than he wanted to show. You are a good man, Logan Yates. I do not think you realize that. You do not know me well enough to say that. Maybe not. But I know you stood between me and trouble without hesitating. I know you pay your bills and treat your customers fairly. I know you have not once made me feel uncomfortable or unwelcome, even though I showed up uninvited and pushed my way into your kitchen. She smiled faintly. That says something about a man's character. Logan did not know what to say to that, so he said nothing, just stood there feeling like the floorboards were shifting under his feet. Finally, Nora sighed. I should let you finish up. Good night, Logan. Good night. He watched her climb the stairs, that blue wrapper floating behind her like water, and wondered when exactly his carefully ordered world had started spinning off its axis. It had been 5 years since Margaret died, 5 years of deliberate isolation and emotional numbness. He had convinced himself he was content, that he did not need anything or anyone beyond the familiar routines of running his saloon and keeping to himself. But Nora was making him remember what it felt like to care about something beyond just getting through each day. She was making him remember that he was still alive, still capable of feeling things besides grief and anger. And that terrified him more than any gang of troublemakers ever could. The summer heat intensified as July gave way to August, turning Linden into a furnace where even the wind felt like dragon's breath. Business slowed to a trickle during the day, picking up only in the evenings when people emerged from whatever cool shelter they had found to endure the daylight hours. Logan took to opening later and staying open longer, adjusting to the rhythms of heat-maddened Kansas. Nora thrived somehow, moving through the kitchen and saloon with unflappable efficiency, even when the temperature made everyone else irritable and sluggish. She kept her hair pinned up tight, wore her lightest dresses, and produced meals that were simple but satisfying, nothing too heavy for the weather. Logan found himself studying the way sweat beaded on her neck, the way she pressed cool cloths to her wrists and temples, the way she smiled when she caught him watching and said nothing, just went back to work. They had fallen into an easy partnership, anticipating each other's needs without having to speak. Logan would reach for a glass just as Nora finished washing it. Nora would start coffee the moment she heard Logan's footsteps on the stairs. They moved around each other in the small kitchen like dancers who had been practicing together for years instead of weeks. It should not have felt so natural, but it did, and Logan was running out of excuses for why that was a bad thing. One evening in mid-August, after the supper crowd had cleared out and only a few dedicated card players remained nursing their beers, Logan found Nora sitting on the back step looking out at the sunset. The sky was streaked with orange and purple, beautiful in the way that brutal summer sunsets often are. He hesitated, then sat down beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "Long day," he observed. "They are all long days." But she did not sound like she was complaining, just stating fact. "I do not mind, though. It is good to be busy, good to feel useful." "You are more than useful. This place runs better than it has in years, maybe ever." Nora glanced at him, surprised. "That is high praise coming from you." "You are not exactly free with compliments. I say what I mean." Logan picked at a splinter on the wooden step. "You have made a difference here. To the business, to the town. People talk about the saloon differently now. They come for the food as much as the drink." That was the plan. She smiled, watching the sunset paint the world in fire. "Make myself indispensable so you cannot possibly fire me." "Why would I fire you?" The smile faded. "I do not know, but in my experience good things do not last. Better to have a plan." Logan understood that kind of thinking, the constant preparation for loss, the inability to trust that anything good might be permanent. "Your husband," he said slowly. "What was he really like?" Nora was quiet for so long he thought she might not answer. Then, "Thomas was kind, gentle. He loved books and music and had dreams of saving enough money to open his own shop. We were married for 3 years, and they were mostly good years." She paused. "But if I am being honest, I think we were more companions than lovers. He needed someone to keep house and provide respectability. I needed safety and a name that was not my own. We were fond of each other, but it was not." She stopped, shaking her head. "It does not matter now. He is gone and I am here, and that part of my life is over." "What name did you have before?" Logan asked, curious despite himself. "One that belongs to a girl who does not exist anymore." Nora stood, brushing dust from her skirt. "I should get the kitchen cleaned for morning. Those pots will not wash themselves." Logan caught her hand before she could retreat, the gesture as surprising to him as it obviously was to her. Her skin was warm and slightly rough from work, real and solid and alive. "You do not have to run away from every conversation that gets too personal, you know. I am not going to use your past against you. Like I am not going to use yours against you." She countered, but she did not pull her hand away. "I see the way you shut down whenever anyone asks about your wife. I see the way you flinch when children run past the saloon. You have scars, Logan, same as me. Maybe we should both respect each other's private hurts." She was right, damn her. Logan released her hand, feeling the loss of contact like a physical thing. "Fair enough, but Nora, if you ever do want to talk, I am willing to listen." "Same to you." She touched his shoulder briefly, a gesture so gentle it made his chest ache. Then she was gone, disappearing into the saloon's dim interior, leaving Logan sitting on the back step with the sunset fading, and his carefully maintained emotional walls feeling dangerously unstable. The breaking point came on a Saturday night 3 weeks later, when the saloon was packed with ranch hands celebrating payday and farmers taking a rare night off from their endless labor. Logan was pouring drinks as fast as he could, Nora was running food, and the noise level was approaching something that might wake the dead. It was good chaos, the kind that meant money in the till and satisfied customers, but it was still chaos. Logan was drawing another beer when he saw Nora stumble, her tray tilting dangerously. He moved without thinking, catching both her and the tray before either could hit the floor. She was shaking, he realized, and her face was flushed with more than just exertion. "You are burning up," he said, pressing his hand to her forehead. She was feverish, clearly had been pushing through it all evening. "Why did you not say you were sick?" "Because it is Saturday and you need me." She tried to pull away, but her legs buckled. Logan caught her again, this time lifting her into his arms despite her protests. "Pete," he bellowed toward the kitchen, where the old cook had been pressed back into service washing dishes. "Come tend the bar. I will be back in 10 minutes." He carried Nora upstairs, ignoring the catcalls and teasing from the customers, focusing only on the woman in his arms who felt too hot and too light and too fragile. In her room, he set her on the bed and went to fetch cool water and cloths, moving with the efficiency of someone who had done this before, who remembered the helpless terror of watching someone burn with fever and being unable to do anything about it. But Nora was not Margaret, and this was just a summer fever, probably nothing serious. Logan made himself believe that as he bathed her face and neck with cool water, as he got her to drink a little, as he sat beside her bed and watched her slip into an uneasy sleep, he should go back downstairs. Pete was probably drowning, unable to keep up with the crowd. But Logan could not make himself leave, could not stop watching the rise and fall of Nora's chest, could not stop thinking about how much it would hurt if she died, if he lost someone else to the cruel randomness of the world. When had this happened? When had Nora Gallagher stopped being just his cook and bookkeeper and become someone he could not imagine losing? Logan did not have an answer, just the uncomfortable certainty that somewhere between that first bowl of stew and this moment, she had slipped past every defense he had built and taken up residence in the heart he had thought was dead. "You are a damn fool, Logan Yates," he muttered to himself. But he stayed anyway, through the noise from downstairs, through Nora's restless tossing, through the long hours until her fever finally broke around midnight and she opened her eyes, confused and disoriented. "Logan, what, you collapsed? Fever?" He pressed his hand to her forehead again, relieved to find it cooler. "You should have told me you were sick. I did not want to let you down." Her voice was hoarse, exhausted. "Saturday is our busiest night. To hell with Saturday night. You think I care more about selling whiskey than making sure you are all right?" The words came out harsher than he intended, rough with fear he did not know how to express any other way. Nora blinked at him, and something shifted in her eyes, a dawning awareness that made Logan's heart pound. "Logan, get some rest," he interrupted, standing abruptly. "I will check on you in the morning." He fled before she could say whatever she had been about to say, before he could do something stupid like tell her the truth, that he was falling for her, that she scared him more than any bullet or blade ever had, that he had no idea how to let himself care about someone again, but he was doing it anyway, helpless as a man in quicksand. Downstairs, Pete had somehow managed to keep things from descending into complete chaos, though several tables were upset about their slow service, and one cowboy was passed out in the corner. Logan threw himself back into work, pouring drinks and making change and pretending his hands were not shaking, pretending his world had not just tilted on its axis one more time. The next morning, Nora was pale but determined to work, ignoring Logan's order to stay in bed. They moved around each other with careful politeness, neither acknowledging what had happened the night before, the intimacy of him caring for her, the way he had stayed when he did not have to. But something had changed, some invisible line had been crossed, and Logan could feel it in every glance, every accidental touch, every moment of loaded silence. It was Sheriff Morrison who finally forced the issue, stopping by the saloon on Monday afternoon with news that made Logan's blood run cold. Those 3 men who were causing trouble a few weeks back. They are part of the Dalton gang. The gang has been working its way south, and word is they are heading this way. I wanted to warn you in case they decide to come back looking for easy pickings. Logan's hand tightened on the glass he was polishing. When? Could be days, could be weeks. Hard to say with gangs like that. Morrison tipped his hat. Just keep your eyes open, and if you see anything suspicious, you let me know. I will have deputies watching, but we are stretched thin with harvest season starting. After the sheriff left, Logan found Nora in the kitchen, her face troubled. She had obviously overheard. The Dalton gang. That is the one you mentioned when I first arrived, is it not? Yes. They are bad news, Nora, really bad news. Logan ran his hand through his hair, thinking fast. Maybe you should leave town for a while just until this blows over. You could go to Topeka, stay with I am not leaving. Her chin came up in that stubborn way he had come to recognize. This is my home now, Logan. I am not running from every threat that comes along. This is not just some drunk cowboy grabbing at you. These are killers, Nora. If they decide they want something, they take it, and they do not care who dies in the process. Then I guess you will just have to protect me. She said it lightly, but her eyes were serious, holding his with an intensity that made his breath catch. That is what you do, is it not? Protect things that matter, you matter, he said, the words escaping before he could stop them. Damn it, Nora, you matter, and I will not lose someone else. The silence that followed was deafening. Nora set down the knife she had been using to chop vegetables, wiping her hands slowly on her apron. When she finally spoke, her voice was gentle. Tell me about her, about Margaret. Logan wanted to refuse, to retreat behind his walls and change the subject. But Nora had been honest with him, had shared her own pain, and maybe it was time he did the same. So he told her, haltingly, about meeting Margaret at a church social in 1871, about her quiet smile and capable hands, about their simple wedding and the small house they had rented on the edge of town. He told her about the war, about coming home with a bullet scar and nightmares, about Margaret's patient understanding when he woke up screaming. He told her about the joy when she got pregnant, and the horror when everything went wrong, when the midwife's face grew grave and the doctor could not stop the bleeding, when he held his wife's hand and felt her slip away along with the son they had already named David. I could not save them, he finished, his voice raw. I could not do a damn thing except watch them die, and I swore I would never put myself through that again, never care about anyone enough that losing them would destroy me. Nora crossed the space between them, taking his hands in hers. But you are caring anyway, are you not, despite your best efforts? Logan looked down at their joined hands, at her fingers laced through his, and felt the last of his resistance crumble. Yes, he admitted. God help me, yes. God help us both. And then she was kissing him, or he was kissing her. He was not sure who moved first and did not care. Her lips were soft and warm and tasted like hope, and Logan kissed her back with 5 years of loneliness and longing pouring out of him like water from a broken dam. He pulled her closer, one hand sliding into her hair, the other wrapping around her waist, and Nora melted against him with a soft sound that made his heart stutter. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Nora rested her forehead against his. I did not come here looking for this, she whispered. I came here to hide, to start over, to be alone. Me too. Logan cupped her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. But maybe being alone is overrated. She laughed, the sound shaky but real. Maybe it is. Then her expression grew serious. Logan, I am not Margaret. I cannot replace her, and I would not try. But if you are willing to take a chance on something new, on someone who comes with her own scars and her own past, he kissed her again, softer this time, a promise rather than a desperate confession. I am willing. Scared as hell, but willing. Good. Nora smiled against his lips. Because I am falling in love with you, Logan Yates, and I think you might be falling too, and I am tired of both of us pretending otherwise. I am falling, he confirmed, the admission both terrifying and liberating. Have been for weeks, probably since you walked in here with your carpet bag and your sharp tongue and demanded a job. They stood there in the kitchen, holding each other, while the afternoon sun slanted through the windows and turned everything golden. For the first time in 5 years, Logan allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could have this. That maybe happiness was not something that had died with Margaret, but something that could be built again, different but no less real. The peace lasted exactly 3 days before the Dalton gang rode into Linden. Logan saw them coming from the saloon window, 7 men riding hard and kicking up dust, their horses lathered and their faces grim. He recognized the tall one from before, and his stomach dropped. Nora, get upstairs. Now. She did not argue, just grabbed the ledger she had been working on and disappeared up the stairs. Logan checked his Winchester, made sure his revolver was loaded, and stepped out onto the street. Sheriff Morrison was already there, flanked by his 2 deputies, looking like they knew this was a fight they could not win but were going to stand anyway. Logan, get back inside, Morrison ordered. This is my town too, Sheriff. I am not hiding. Logan positioned himself in the doorway, rifle ready. Around them, Linden was emptying fast, people scattering to safety as word spread that trouble had arrived. The gang pulled up in front of the bank, and the tall man Logan recognized dismounted with a grin that showed too many teeth. Gentlemen, this does not have to be difficult. We are just here for what is in that bank, and then we will be on our way. No one has to die today. You are not robbing our bank, Morrison said firmly. Turn around and ride out while you still can. The tall man sighed theatrically. That is unfortunate. I was hoping you would be reasonable. He drew his gun with the smooth speed of someone who had done it 1,000 times before. What happened next was chaos. Gunfire erupted, deafening in the quiet street. Logan fired, saw one of the gang members go down, then ducked back as bullets tore into the doorframe beside him. Morrison and his deputies were firing too, but they were badly outnumbered. Logan saw one deputy fall, then Morrison took a bullet to the shoulder and went down hard. Logan kept shooting, methodically working the Winchester, trying to give the townspeople time to get clear, trying to keep the gang pinned down. He hit another man, saw him pitch sideways off his horse, but there were still 5 of them and they were spreading out, flanking. This was going badly fast. Then a new sound joined the gunfire, the sharp crack of a rifle from above. Logan risked a glance up and saw Nora in the window, his spare rifle to her shoulder, firing with precision that spoke of experience. She hit one of the gang members who was trying to circle around behind the sheriff, dropping him before he could get a clear shot. Nora, get down, Logan shouted, but she ignored him, working the bolt and firing again. Between the 2 of them, they created enough crossfire to force the gang back, giving Morrison time to drag his wounded deputy to cover. The tall man realized they were losing, that this small town had more fight than he had expected. He shouted something to his remaining men, and they wheeled their horses, firing wildly as they retreated. Logan got off 2 more shots, hitting one of the horses. The animal screamed and went down, throwing its rider. The gang did not stop to help him, just kept riding, disappearing in a cloud of dust and gunsmoke. In the ringing silence that followed, Logan became aware of several things at once. He was not hit, though his door frame looked like Swiss cheese. Morrison was alive, pressing his hand to his shoulder wound. 3 gang members were dead or dying in the street, and Nora was thundering down the stairs, the rifle still in her hands, her face fierce and beautiful and absolutely terrified. "Are you hurt?" she demanded, running her hands over him like she was checking for wounds. "Logan, are you hurt?" "I am fine. But what the hell was that?" He took the rifle from her shaking hands. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" "My father ran a boarding house in one of the worst neighborhoods in Philadelphia," she said, her voice unsteady. "He taught both his daughters to shoot before we were 12, said a woman should be able to protect herself." She looked past him to the carnage in the street. "Oh God. Did I kill someone? You saved lives." Logan pulled her against him, feeling her trembling. "You saved Morrison, probably saved me too. That was the bravest, most foolish thing I have ever seen." "I was not going to hide while you died," she said fiercely, her face pressed against his chest. "Not again. Not ever again." Logan held her tighter, not caring who saw, not caring about anything except the fact that they were both alive and together. Around them, townspeople were emerging from their hiding places, checking on the wounded, dealing with the dead. Doc Hendricks appeared to tend to Morrison and his deputy. The captured gang member was hauled off to jail, cursing and bleeding. It was over. Lyndon had survived, and so had they, but Logan knew with absolute certainty that he would never be the same. You could not go through something like that and not be changed. You could not almost lose someone you loved and not realize that life was too short and too precious to waste on fear and regrets. "Marry me," he said into Nora's hair. She pulled back, staring at him like she was not sure she had heard right. "What? Marry me?" he repeated, more firmly this time. "I know it is too fast and probably crazy, but I do not care. I love you, Nora Gallagher. I love your strength and your cooking and the way you smile when you think no one is watching. I love that you can shoot like Annie Oakley and keep books like an accountant and still make the best damn biscuits in Kansas. I almost lost you today, almost lost you without ever telling you how I feel, and I am not making that mistake again." Tears were streaming down her face, but she was smiling. "Yes," she said. "Yes, you ridiculous man, I will marry you. I love you too, have loved you almost from the start, and I am tired of pretending to be careful and sensible when all I want is to be with you." Logan kissed her there in the doorway of his bullet-riddled saloon, with half of Lyndon watching and the bodies barely cold in the street, and it was perfect. Imperfect and bloody and absolutely perfect, because they were alive and together, and that was all that mattered. The wedding was held 2 weeks later in the little church at the end of Main Street, with half the town in attendance despite the church ladies' reservations about the propriety of it all. Nora wore a simple blue dress that made her eyes look like storm clouds, and Logan wore his only suit, brushed clean of dust for the occasion. Sheriff Morrison stood up as his best man, his arm still in a sling, and Mrs. Henderson, who ran the general store, stood with Nora. The minister kept it short and sweet, which Logan appreciated. He was not much for ceremony, but when it came time to say his vows, to promise to love and honor and cherish this woman who had walked into his life and changed everything, the words came easily. Nora's vows were equally simple and equally profound, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "I do," Logan said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. "I do," Nora echoed, and then they were kissing and the church erupted in applause and cheers. The reception was held in the saloon which Nora had insisted on. "It is where we met," she said. "It is where we fell in love. It seems right." So they filled the saloon with food and music and laughter, and Logan danced with his wife while the townspeople who had once thought his place was a den of sin clapped along and toasted their happiness. Late in the evening, after most of the guests had gone home and only a few stragglers remained, Logan found Nora standing on the back step where they had first really talked, looking up at the stars. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Happy?" he asked. "Happier than I thought possible," she leaned back against him. "When I left Philadelphia, I thought my life was over. I thought I was just running to survive. But I was not running, I was coming here, coming to you. I am glad you came." Logan turned her in his arms so he could see her face in the starlight. "I was half dead before you walked through that door, Nora. I did not even realize it, but I was. You brought me back to life." "We brought each other back," she corrected. "That is what love does, I think. It reminds us that we are still here, still alive, still capable of joy." They stood there under the stars, holding each other, while Lyndon settled into sleep around them. Inside, someone had left a lamp burning, casting golden light through the windows. Their saloon, their home, their life together, just beginning. The first year of their marriage was not easy, but it was good. They learned each other's rhythms and habits, the small adjustments required when two people who have been alone learn to share their lives. Logan discovered that Nora talked in her sleep, mostly nonsense, but sometimes fragments of dreams that made him smile. Nora discovered that Logan had nightmares still, echoes of the war and Margaret's death, and she learned to wake him gently and hold him until the darkness passed. The saloon prospered under their joint management. Nora's cooking drew people from neighboring towns, and Logan's fair dealing and quality liquor kept them coming back. They hired Pete full-time to help with the workload, and later added a young man named Charlie to tend bar on busy nights. The upstairs rooms, previously empty, were rented out to respectable travelers, providing additional income and making the place feel less like just a saloon and more like a proper business. Lyndon itself was changing too, growing from a rough cattle town into something more settled. A proper schoolhouse was built, and a new church. The railroad brought more people, more commerce, more opportunity. Logan and Nora became pillars of the community, respected for their hard work and their kindness. The church ladies eventually forgave Nora for working in a saloon when she organized a charity drive for families struggling through a hard winter. Sheriff Morrison became a regular dinner guest, eventually bringing along a widow named Helen, who made him smile in a way Logan recognized all too well. But the best change came in the spring of 1880 when Nora told Logan she was pregnant. He was terrified, the memories of losing Margaret crashing over him like a wave. But Nora took his face in her hands and made him look at her. "I am not her," she said firmly. "This is not then. We have Doc Hendricks and I am healthy and strong, and we are going to be fine. Do you hear me, Logan Yates? We are going to be fine." He wanted to believe her, tried to believe her, but the fear was a living thing in his chest. For the next 7 months, he watched her like a hawk, worrying over every complaint, every moment of fatigue. Nora endured his hovering with remarkable patience, only occasionally telling him to stop being ridiculous and let her work. When her time came in December, Logan paced the floor downstairs while Doc Hendricks attended her upstairs, every minute an agony of waiting and remembering. But this time, when the doctor finally came down, he was smiling. "You have a son," Hendricks announced. "And your wife is tired but doing just fine. Textbook delivery, Logan. Nothing to worry about." Logan took the stairs 3 at a time, bursting into the bedroom to find Nora propped up against the pillows, exhausted but glowing, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. She looked up at him with such radiant joy that it hurt to look at her. "Meet your son," she said softly. Logan approached slowly, hardly daring to breathe, and looked down at the tiny red face peering out from the blankets. His son. His and Nora's. A baby who was alive and healthy, whose first cry was strong and indignant. Logan felt something break open in his chest, all the fear and grief of the past years cracking apart to make room for this overwhelming love. "He is perfect," Logan whispered, touching one impossibly small hand. The baby gripped his finger with surprising strength. "What should we name him?" Nora smiled. "I thought if you would not mind we could name him David, after the son you lost." Logan's throat closed, tears burning his eyes. He had not cried when Margaret died, too shocked and numb to process the loss. But now, holding this perfect new life, thinking about the one that had never had a chance, the tears came freely. "David," he agreed roughly. "David Morrison Yates." "Morrison?" Nora raised an eyebrow. "The sheriff saved my life during that shootout. Seemed right to honor that." Logan sat on the edge of the bed, one arm around Nora, the other cradling his son. His family. His improbable, impossible, perfect family. "Thank you," he said to Nora, "for being brave enough to push into my life. For not letting me hide. For giving me this." "Thank you for letting me in," she replied, leaning her head on his shoulder. "For loving me despite your fear. For choosing to live again instead of just existing." They sat like that for a long time, the three of them, while the winter wind howled outside and the saloon settled into silence below. Logan thought about the path that had brought him here, all the pain and loss and loneliness that had seemed like it would never end. He thought about the bullet that had missed him in the war, and the years he had wasted being afraid to feel anything. He thought about a woman with storm-gray eyes walking into his saloon on a hot July day and changing everything. Life was not fair, and it was not easy, and there were no guarantees. But sitting here with his wife and son, Logan felt something he had not felt in years. Genuine, uncomplicated happiness. Hope for the future. The sense that maybe, just maybe, the worst was behind him and the best was yet to come. David started fussing and Nora adjusted him, preparing to nurse. Logan stood to give them privacy, but she caught his hand. "Stay. You are part of this too." So he stayed, watching his wife feed his son, and felt his heart, that organ he had thought dead and buried, beat strong and sure in his chest. Alive. He was alive, truly alive for the first time in years. The years that followed were full and rich, the kind of life Logan had stopped believing was possible. David grew into a sturdy, cheerful boy with his mother's gray eyes and his father's stubborn streak. When he was 2, Nora got pregnant again, and this time Logan managed his fear better, trusting in her strength and Doc Hendrick's skill. Their daughter Emma was born in the summer of 1883, smaller and quieter than David had been, with dark hair and a thoughtful expression that made her look wise beyond her infant years. The saloon continued to prosper, evolving slowly into something that resembled a restaurant more than a drinking establishment, though Logan never stopped serving quality whiskey to those who wanted it. He and Nora expanded the building, adding a proper dining room that could seat 30 people, and Nora trained a young woman named Sarah to help with the cooking. The upstairs room stayed full of travelers and new settlers, and Logan's reputation for running an honest establishment spread throughout the region. Linden grew around them, maturing from a rough frontier town into a proper community with schools and churches and tree-lined streets. The railroad brought more changes, connecting them to the wider world. The Dalton gang was eventually caught and hanged, and the wild lawlessness that had defined the early years of the town gave way to something more civilized, if less exciting. Through it all, Logan and Nora remained partners in every sense of the word. They argued sometimes, usually about Logan's tendency to work too hard or Nora's habit of taking in every stray that wandered through Linden. But they always made up, usually in the quiet hours after the children were asleep, reminding each other why they had chosen this life, this love, this commitment. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1888, Logan closed the saloon for the day, an unheard-of gesture that had half the town speculating about what was wrong. But nothing was wrong. Everything was right, almost impossibly right, and Logan wanted to celebrate that with his wife without the distraction of customers and responsibilities. They packed a picnic and took the children to the creek that ran just outside town, the same creek where Logan had learned to fish as a boy, before the war, before Margaret, before everything. David, now 8, immediately started exploring, looking for frogs and interesting rocks. Emma, at 5, stayed closer, weaving wildflowers into chains with the focused intensity she brought to everything. Logan and Nora sat on a blanket, watching their children play, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. The day was perfect, Kansas summer at its finest, warm but not scorching, with a breeze that carried the smell of wildflowers and growing things. "Do you ever regret it?" Nora asked suddenly. "Walking away from your old life? I know you loved Margaret. I never wanted to replace her." Logan thought about the question carefully, giving it the consideration it deserved. "No," he said finally. "I will always love Margaret and I will always mourn what we lost. But that does not diminish what I have with you. You are not a replacement, Nora. You are a new chapter, a second chance I never thought I would get. What we have is different from what I had with her, but it is no less real, no less important." "Good." She kissed his cheek. "Because I love you, Logan Yates, and I intend to keep loving you for the next 50 years at least." 50 years. Logan smiled at the thought. "That would make me 86. I might not make it that long." "You will. You are too stubborn to die." She sat up, her eyes dancing with mischief. "Besides, who would run the saloon without you? I certainly cannot lift beer barrels the way you do." "You could if you wanted to. I have seen you move a full pickle barrel by yourself when you thought no one was watching." "That was one time, and I was very motivated." Nora laughed, the sound bright and free. "Fine, you caught me. I am stronger than I pretend. But I like having you around to do the heavy lifting, among other things." The way she said it made Logan's blood warm, even after 10 years of marriage. "Mrs. Yates, are you flirting with me?" "Always," she confirmed and kissed him properly, deep and slow and sweet. When they broke apart, Emma was watching them with the solemn intensity that was so characteristic of her. "Mama, why do you kiss Papa so much?" she asked. "Because I love him," Nora said simply. "When you love someone, you want to show them in as many ways as possible." Emma considered this, then nodded and went back to her flowers. David, having caught several frogs, was now trying to build them a house out of rocks and sticks. Logan watched his children, his wife, the creek flowing peacefully by, and felt a contentment so complete it was almost painful. This was what happiness looked like, he realized. Not the absence of pain or loss or difficulty, but the presence of love strong enough to weather all of those things. Not forgetting the past, but building a future that honored it while moving forward. Not the elimination of fear, but the courage to love anyway, to risk the heartbreak because the alternative, a life lived safe but empty, was so much worse. "Thank you," he said to Nora, not for the first time and certainly not for the last. "For everything." She squeezed his hand. "Thank you for letting me stay. For giving me a home, a family, a life I never dreamed I could have." "Best decision I ever made," Logan said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. They stayed at the creek until the sun started to set, painting the sky in those brilliant oranges and purples that were so uniquely Kansas. David had mud on his face and frogs in his pockets. Emma had wildflower crowns for everyone, slightly crooked but made with love. Nora had grass stains on her dress and a sunburn on her nose. And Logan, hardened cowboy, war veteran, saloon owner, widower, had his family around him and his heart so full it felt like it might burst. The walk back to town was slow, David chattering about his adventures while Emma dozed on Logan's shoulder. Nora walked beside them, carrying the picnic basket, humming one of those old songs she loved. Linden came into view, lamplights starting to glow in windows as evening settled in. Their saloon stood on Main Street, solid and prosperous, the sign Logan had commissioned 5 years ago proclaiming it the Yates family restaurant and saloon. Home. It was home, in a way Logan had not felt since before the war, before loss taught him to keep his distance from anything he might lose. But distance was impossible with Nora, with David and Emma, with the life they had built together from loneliness and second chances. Distance was impossible, and Logan found he did not want it anyway. Better to love fully and risk the pain than to never love at all. Inside, they put the children to bed, David protesting that he was not tired even as his eyes drooped closed. Emma went more easily, clutching her stuffed rabbit and asking for one more story. Logan sat on the edge of her bed and told her about a princess who was brave enough to save herself, and about a knight who learned that real strength was allowing yourself to love. Emma was asleep before he finished, but he told the ending anyway, for himself as much as for her. Later, in their own room, Logan held Nora close and listened to the familiar sounds of their home settling for the night. The creak of floorboards, the distant sound of voices from the saloon below where Charlie was closing up, the wind moving through the trees outside their window. Normal sounds, everyday sounds, sounds that spoke of life continuing, of tomorrow coming, of a future that was bright instead of empty. "I love you," he murmured into Nora's hair. "In case I do not say it enough." "You say it plenty," she assured him, her voice drowsy in content. "But I never get tired of hearing it. I love you too, Logan. Always." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, two people who had been alone finding completeness in partnership. The hardened cowboy who swore he would never love again had found a woman who changed everything, and in changing everything, had given him back his life. The years continued to pass, as years do, bringing changes both expected and surprising. David grew into a young man with his father's sense of justice and his mother's sharp mind, eventually heading east to study law, something that made Logan both proud and slightly bewildered. Emma stayed closer to home, marrying a young doctor who came to work with the aging Doc Hendricks, giving Logan and Nora their first grandchildren before they had even reached their 50th birthdays. The saloon, now run primarily by Nora with Logan stepping back to enjoy what he insisted were not retirement years but simply slower years, became a true institution in Linden. The new century arrived with optimism and celebration, and the Yates family was there to see it. 4 generations gathered in the building that had been witness to so much life, so much love, so many second chances. On a warm evening in the summer of 1903, Logan sat on the back step, the same step where he and Nora had first really talked 25 years earlier. His hair was gray now, his body carrying the aches of 64 years and a life well lived. But his heart was strong, and when Nora came out to join him, settling beside him with the comfortable ease of decades together, he felt that same flutter he had felt when she first walked into his saloon. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, taking his hand. "Everything," he said honestly. "The past, the present, how lucky I am. How close I came to missing all of this because I was too scared to try again." But you did try. That is what matters." Nora rested her head on his shoulder, just as she had done countless times before. "We both tried, and look what we built." Logan looked out over Linden, the town that had been his home for most of his life, the place where he had lost everything and found everything, often in the same breath. The church where they married stood quiet in the evening light. The schoolhouse where his children had learned stood empty for the summer. The cemetery on the hill held Margaret and baby David, names he still remembered with sorrow but no longer with the crushing grief that had once defined him. "No regrets," he said softly. "No regrets," Nora agreed. "Only gratitude." They sat together as the sun set on another day, another year, another chapter of their improbable love story. Inside, their grandchildren were laughing, their children were sharing a meal, and the legacy of love they had built continued to grow and flourish. The hardened cowboy who swore he would never love again had been proven wonderfully wrong, and every day since Nora Gallagher walked into his life, Logan Yates thanked whatever Providence had given him the courage to open his heart one more time. Because in the end, love was worth the risk. It was always worth the risk, and he would choose her, choose this life, choose love 1,000 times over.